Hi guys, welcome to this edition of ArmCareIQ, and today we're going to talk about the difference between elbow stress and elbow load and why does it matter. I hear a lot about arm stress in the industry, and I don't think we fully have captured the meaning behind it and how to actually define it from a physics sense, so that we're looking at the right things and saying the right things. So how is it different? How is stress different than torque or just elbow load in general? With stress, you need to know the cross-sectional area of the tissue that's handling the force that's applied to it. So stress is measured in pascals, and it requires two components that I'm showing here. We need to know the torque, and most often when we talk about elbow stress, we really mean torque because we don't know the cross-sectional area of the tissue. But there are three main axes about your elbow joint that your forearm moves, okay? One is flexion, extension. The other is pronation, supination around the long bone of the forearm. And the other is this varus and valgus torque. So basically, it's the off-axis movement. If I had a plate in my hand and I'm moving it back and forth, that's what's basically opening and closing the elbow joint. When we talk about varus torque, that's the torque that's used to resist the medial elbow opening, and it's measured biomechanically. And that gives us a perspective of how much load is being applied to open that inner elbow so that you have to restrain it. When we talk about cross-sectional area of the ligament in length is around a little bit bigger than the eraser on the end of a standard pencil. It's about 6 millimeters or more. It's a little bit bigger in professional athletes that have thrown for a while, but in your high school athlete, it's a little bit over 6 millimeters for what I've seen in research. So, there's a lot of force that has to be handled in that area, but remember, we got muscles surrounding the ligament to distribute that load across greater cross-sectional areas so that less is imparted on the actual ligament itself. But if we lose integrity of the tendon strength, it can expose us to additional risk of the ligament experiencing a rupture. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So how do you measure the components of the ulnar collateral ligament? Well, we use a TLOS device in research and an ultrasound wand. So you can see the TLOS device, the elbow's put in this contraption, and there's a force applied at a constant rate that's pushing from your outside of your elbow to the inside to open up the joint. And primarily, you're looking at this particular colored band of the UCL. There's 3 bands, but this one is the anterior bundle, which is the one that's most often injured in throwing athletes. And so what is measured usually about the ligament, they're looking at calcification. Researchers are looking at joint gapping, the distance between the two bones in the elbow joint. They're looking at thickness of the ligament. And you can also get the dimensions of the cross-sectional area by calculating it off of ultrasound. So just to go through this diagram, the 2 red dots, that's where the ligament attaches on each side of those 2 bones, the humerus and the ulna. And then in more specifics, the green dot on this bone diagram and the red dot is essentially the distance that's being measured to look at the joint gapping between the 2 bones. So that's the trochlea, and then the sublime tubercle of the ulna, which is your forearm bone that is on the inside. And so we're looking at this distance when you look at the ultrasound image here. And if the ligament is not sufficient, so it means it doesn't have the same strength, the joint gap is going to increase. And that's something that we don't want to have happen in our throwing athletes, is we don't want to see the joint gapping to increase, because that means there's a lot of laxity in the ulnar collateral ligament. So again, getting back to stress, we need a lot of technology. We need 3D motion capture technology. You could utilize a single sensor, like a sleeve wearable. That's possible to get load, not stress, but then you have to compute that with the cross-sectional area of the ligament. And it's interesting too, because I hear conversations of one athlete having a more stressful delivery than another. And let's just talk about load. if we have athletes that have the two of the same torque, so let's just say I have 100 Newton meters of torque and you have 100 Newton meters of torque, that's our valgus torque or varus torque, what's reflecting the opening of the medial elbow. We may, to the untrained eye, say that we're equivalent in terms of arm stress. But again, I might have a thicker ligament than you. You might have a thinner ligament than me. And that means that your stress levels are actually going to be higher. The other thing we need to do when we look at torque in general or elbow load, we need to be able to look at the relative loading to the body. So for instance, again, we have this 100 Newton meters. You have that, I have that when we throw over 90 miles an hour. And I'm bigger than you, so I'm taller and I'm larger. So that means relative to my body size, my torque values are lower. Again, now we have a comparison because you have higher stress and your torque relative to your body size is greater. So that could expose you at greater risk over time. So it's important that we comprehend all these components in terms of elbow stress and elbow load. So let's get to the applied concept. So stress shielding. If we have some type of micro damaged tissue, let's just say it's in our tendon or our ligament, our body's amazing because it will redistribute the load to stronger collagen fibers. So stronger collagen fibers will take up the load. And then over time, though, that could increase their risk because their stress levels could go up because you have less, healthy tissue that's able to distribute this load to the cross-sectional area. And so, what has to happen is we have to come up with a concept of training that gives the stress back to the weaker fibers so that they can strengthen. Because if you think like you have a forearm flexor strain, that's a big problem because now, it could expose you to greater risks on the ligament, which is underneath of it. So all these cross-sectional relationships of stress are important to improve upon. And one way we do this is with stress relaxation training. So that usually comes in the form of isometric training, where the wrist is pronated, the hand's pronated, and the wrist is flexed. And when we have the tissue at a constant length and we're holding a load isometrically over that constant length, the internal force of the stronger fibers reduces. And what happens is the weaker fibers, when the stronger fibers fatigue and reduce in their force capacity, the weaker fibers then have to take up that load and they can strengthen. So we get into this stress relaxation training paradigm in our specialist course, which is going to be coming out in the future, and I'm really excited about it. But this is the end of the lesson today, and if you guys really like this, like us on YouTube and subscribe. Thanks for listening.